Hey there, my name is Gary Sims and this is Gary Explains. Now, with the recent release of the OnePlus 7 Pro, there's been lots of talk about UFS 3.0 and the performance advantage you get compared to UFS 2.1. And I've been thinking, does it really translate to real-world performance increases? So if you want to find out all about UFS 3.0 and what it means for your smartphone, please let me explain. So first of all, let's just make it clear that UFS 3.0 has a bandwidth increase compared to UFS 2.1. What I mean by bandwidth, think about if you have a pipe for water, the wider the pipe, the more water you can get down it, that's bandwidth. If you have a road with, let's say, 6 lanes on it, getting 6 cars down that 6-lane highway is going to be much more bandwidth, much greater traffic than if you have just a 2-lane road where the cars have to stack up behind each other just on 2 lanes. So that's bandwidth. How wide, how much data can you get down that pipe in one go? And UFS 3.0, it increases that maximum bandwidth. But here's the question, does a smartphone use that maximum bandwidth? And if it does, how much does it use? And if it doesn't, what does it actually mean for real-world performance? So I've done some testing using an app called the Cross-Platform Disk Test, which you can download from Google Play. And I've tested the I/O capabilities of various phones, including the OnePlus 6T, the OnePlus 7 Pro, the Note 9, and so on. And then I've measured those and analyzed the results. Now, this tool measures sequential write speed, sequential read speed, random write speed, and random read speed. Okay, let's just jump straight into the results and see what I found out. Okay, so this first graph here is the sequential write speed. That means that the smartphone is saying to the storage, I want to write this big block of data and I want to write it all in one big chunk, please, sequentially, and please tell me how fast you can do it. And as you can see here, the OnePlus 7 Pro is the clear leader with 222 megabytes a second. So this graph is in megabytes a second. And obviously if you compare that, let's say, to the Note 8, a significantly huge difference, 23 megabytes a second to 222. And even if you compare it to the OnePlus 6T, 135 megabytes a second up to 222 megabytes a second, obviously a big difference. Some of the other devices, the S10 Plus and the P30 Pro, put in good performances, but clearly the OnePlus 7 Pro is the winner here. And so here the phone is saying to the storage, here, take this big chunk of data and please write it. So it's using that bandwidth to its best of ability. And you can see the OnePlus 7 Pro is the clear winner. And it's even more pronounced when we look at sequential read speeds. Now in this case, the smartphone is saying to internal storage, please give me this data in big blocks, please, sequential reads. And you can see here the OnePlus 7 Pro can manage over a gigabyte a second, 1000 megabytes a second. And that's really quite high compared to the S10 Plus, more than double, and significantly more than the OnePlus 6T. One device that did put in a good showing here was the Note 9, managing 727 megabytes a second. But again, utilizing that full bandwidth of UFS 3.0, the OnePlus 7 Pro, the clear winner. Now this next graph is random write speed. So rather than saying here's a big chunk of data, the device is saying to the storage, here's a small bit of data and I'm going to ask you to do lots and lots of small operations rather than one big operation. But even when you look at that, ignoring the P30 Pro, which we'll mention in a second, you can see that the OnePlus 7 Pro is clearly the winner with 7 megabytes a second compared to 5.58 of the OnePlus 6T and way down to just over 1 megabyte a second for the Note 8. Now, the one exception here is clearly the P30 Pro, and that's because it's using Huawei's UFS, which optimizes for certain cases, including these random writes, and clearly that makes a big difference there on the Huawei P30 Pro. Now, when we come to random reads, we see a bit of a different picture. So random reads is when the smartphone says to the storage, I want to read this little bit of data, this little bit of data, this little bit of data. So lots and lots of reads of small bits of data rather than one read of a huge block of data. And you can see here that in fact the OnePlus 7 Pro is not the winner. In fact, it's the slowest device of all of them with 11.23 megabytes a second. Even the Note 8, which has not done well up until now, managed 11.45 megabytes a second. And clearly the winners here are the Note 9 and the P30 Pro with both around 20 megabytes a second. So unfortunately, when it comes to random reads, the OnePlus 7 Pro is not doing very well. So there are two things to note here. First of all, this is because you need to use that full bandwidth when you're doing lots of small operations. Just give me this 4K, give me this 4K. Actually, other factors come into play, like the file system, like the memory controller, like the speed of the flash memory. All these other things come into play here, and actually having a big fat data width that you can send that data down doesn't make much difference. And the second thing I'd like to say is that I tried these tests multiple times. I've tried them, multiple runs. These are the best results I got for the OnePlus 7 Pro. I tried it with, airplane mode on, airplane mode off, the battery was charged, all the things that you might think about. I really did want to make sure these were the right numbers, and these are the right numbers. And in fact, I'm going to show you some screenshots to show you the different results I was getting from the devices. So to put that into context, here it's showing you how long it would take to load 500 megabytes from the disk. So think about loading a reasonably heavy 3D game. 500 megabytes takes half a second, 500 milliseconds on the OnePlus 7 Pro. And obviously compared to the Note 8, double the speed there. But also it's interesting to note that the other devices like the OnePlus 6T and the Note 9 were also able to give us good results. And the thing is here is we're dealing with milliseconds. So half a second is 500 milliseconds and 0.7 seconds is 700 milliseconds. So the other devices there were able to load 500 megabytes of data, and it took 200 milliseconds or so longer. So when you translate that into real world usage, you're gonna, let's say, hit that load, and actually there's going to be a 200 milliseconds difference between them. So when we talk about those fast numbers, they look nice, but when you translate to real world scenarios, obviously 200 milliseconds between friends is not very much. But there's more to the story than this. The majority of activity to a disk is not in sequential form. So obviously if you're thinking about, let's say you start up an app, let's say like Instagram or Twitter, at some point it has to start going to read all of the previous stuff that you've had in your feed, all the images, all of the icons and all that kind of stuff. It's going to have to go off to the network and get the whole new feed. It's going to have to write all that stuff back to the disk caches, and that's all very much random read and random write, not very much sequential read and sequential write. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that 90% of read and writes are actually sequential. So I'm going to show you here sequential read. So I'm not even going to say 50-50. I'm going to say 90% are actually sequential, but 10%, okay, are random reads. So I really am skewing this data in favor of sequential reads, and that's where the OnePlus 7T has the most performance. I really am skewing it in that direction, but let's just see what numbers we get. So here we are. This is how long it takes to load 500 megabytes of data from the disk if 90% of it is read using sequential reads and just 10% using random reads. And you can see here that actually the OnePlus 7 Pro is not the fastest. It takes 4.9 seconds to do it in that case, compared to 3.14 seconds of the P30 Pro, 4.15 seconds of the OnePlus 6T, and you can see all the other numbers there. So as you can see here, when you're dealing with sequential reads and random reads in this 90-10 ratio, the OnePlus 7 Pro does not come out on top because the relative slowness of those random reads actually brings down the overall time that it takes to load 500 megabytes. And you could extrapolate this up to a gigabyte, 2 gigabytes, you can bring it down to 100 megabytes. The maths is fairly simple. Okay, you might be saying you're skewing it at 90% because you've worked out that is the sweet spot that shows that the OnePlus 7T Pro is not as good. Okay, let's move it to 98%. So let's say that all the activity that your app does, your favorite app, your favorite game, all the activity, 98% of it is sequential. So it's really using that UFS bandwidth to its absolute maximum. Only 2% of the operations are random in their nature. What does that do for the overall scores? Well, as you can see here, when you compare the OnePlus 7 Pro with OnePlus 6T, it's just marginally faster now on the OnePlus 7 Pro. It's about equal with the P30 Pro, does beat the S10 Plus by quite a bit there. But when you look at the Note 9, which has always been surprisingly doing really well in all of these tests, it's actually faster than the OnePlus 7 Pro. So when you do 98% to 2%, you still don't see that much of a benefit of UFS 3.0. And you see, this is why actually in real world scenarios, you won't notice much of a difference. Now there will be the occasional situation where the OnePlus 7 Pro will be able to use the full bandwidth of that UFS 3 path, that pipe, and it will be able to read or write that data as quick as possible. But the very nature of computing, the very nature of disk storage means that that is not the case. And so when, for example, I did the speed test G with OnePlus 7 Pro versus the S10 Plus, people were saying, well, how come the OnePlus 7 Pro didn't win? Because surely it's got UFS 3.0. Because the point is that when you start to do any kind of random reads and writes, you don't get the benefit of UFS 3.0. And that's why it wasn't miles ahead of everybody else. People were complaining that my test wasn't good enough. They were saying my test didn't reflect it. Actually, my test reflected perfectly. If you look at the maths that I've just shown you, it reflected perfectly what actually happens in the real world. Loading data using random reads, okay, is much, much slower and doesn't have the benefits of using that UFS 3.0. Even when you do it 98%, 2%, just pulling in that 2% of random reads brings down the overall time. Okay, there you go. My name's Gary Sims. This is Gary Explains. Top tip, don't believe all the marketing. It's just advertising. Okay, I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to ring that bell. Don't forget to subscribe first of all and then ring the bell. And well, that's it. I'll see you in the next one.